part-time workers and regular worker almost 50%. The what is that?
그죠. 100만이 밀리언인데요. 전체 노동자의 44.7%가 비정규직입니다. 800만.
So inequality is very high, and then we had 44, almost 50% of all workers in Korea. They were considered to be part-time workers, so their jobs were not guaranteed.
8 million.
So 8 million.
그 다음에 출산율이 너무 낮아서 살기 힘드니까 애를 안 낳죠. 그래서 100년 뒤에는 남한 인구 추정치가 350만이라는 겁니다. 지금 홍콩 인구보다 작아서 나요.
So life is hard, inequality is high. So there's a very low birth rate, and it's kind of estimated that in 100 years, the population of Korea will be 3 million, which is less than Hong Kong, right?
이거는 탑 10%의 인컴인데요. 한국은 굉장히 높은 나라에 속합니다. 집중도가. 근데 더 중요한 것은 95년부터 2012년 사이에 굉장히 샤프하게 올라가고 있다는 거죠. 인구의 10%가 가고 있는 부가 29%에서 45%로 확.
So this indicates that the top 10% of the Korean population, it kind of compares. And if you look at Korea, between
1995년부터 2012년 사이에.
So from 1995 to 2000.
1995
to
2012.
Right. The gap.
18년 만에서 17년 동안.
It rose. The income that is captured by the top 10% rose from 29.2 to 41.9 within those years.
세계에서 이렇게 가파르게 소득이 집중되는 나라는 싱가포르밖에 없어요. 비슷한 거.
And similarly, that is only portrayed in Singapore.
영국만 해도 15년 동안 비슷하잖아요. 프랑스도 비슷하고 다 비슷하죠. 말레이시아는 오히려 떨어졌네요.
You know, if you look at England, France, and New Zealand, it's about the same, but Korea and Singapore.
노동자 조직률도 계속 떨어지고 있습니다. 한국, 일본, 미국이 다 노조 조직률이 떨어지고 있죠.
So the collective bargaining is also, it decreases throughout the years, and also in Korea it went down.
이게 노동자 조합 조직.
So labor unions.
그리고 아까 얘기했던 거고요. 성별 인구 격차도 한국은 되게 큽니다. 세계 1등이에요.
Right. So gender pay gap between men and women, you know, Korea is very wide.
세계에서 제일 인구 격차가 큽니다.
One of the most in the world.
출산율은 세계에서 제일 낮은 나라죠.
And we have the lowest birth rate in the world.
그래서 100년 뒤에 30년. 그리고 여기 알기 힘든데 지금은 좀 높아지고 있는데 한국 투표율은 이렇게 계속 낮아졌습니다. 정치적 일로 낮아지다가 최근에 올라가고 있어요.
So over the years, starting from 1980, the voter turnout was on the decrease, but now it's kind of going up.
그러다가 결정적인 게 2014년에 세월 페리 디제스터라는 게 터졌습니다.
So in 2014, I think many of you heard about the ferry disaster, Seoul ferry.
아까 비디오에서 아이들 사진이 계속 나오는데 그게 다 이 학교에서 죽은 친구들 얘기예요.
So you were in the video, you saw a lot of pictures of students in uniform, and those were the pictures of the students that died on the Seoul ferry.
세월 페리 디제스터는 뭐 내가 다 설명 긴것 같아서.
Yeah, this is kind of the background. I think many of you probably heard about it when this was happening, but it was when the ship sank in over
476명 중에서 304명이 죽었어요.
Right, and out of the 476 passengers, 300.
그날 대통령은 아무것도 안 했고 정부는 아무런 조사도 안 했습니다.
And I think this was one of the biggest incidents leading up to the demonstration because during the 7 hours, which was the golden time to save these students, President Park Geun-hye lead a rescue mission.
그래서 광장에서 다루어진 주요 키워드는 대통령 이름, 그 다음에 대통령의 친구, 그 스캔들을 일으킨 대통령의 친구 이름, 그 다음에 세월 페리, 이 세 가지가 계속해서 반복적으로 외쳐진 거죠.
So during the protests, these are some of the key words that you could repeatedly see among the signages that people were holding or the picket signs.
그리고 거기 되게 상징적인 얘기가 있었어요. 그 승객들한테 가만히 있으라고 그랬는데 가만히 있던 사람은 다 구조받지 못하고 죽었어요. 그래서 사람들이 그걸 풍자하느라고 우리 보고 가만히 있으라고 이렇게 시위를 한 거죠.
So this says stay put, and the reason why this was used during the demonstration was during this the ferry disaster, the students were instructed to stay put and not just stay where they are, and which was one of the biggest reasons why they weren't able to come out.
그래서 이게 상징이 됐죠. 가만히 있으면 아무도 구해주지 않는다. 싸워야 얻는다.
So this became a symbol in the movement. So kind of empowering people. If we stay put, nothing will happen. So we need to act. So this was kind of a political spin on.
그래서 그 다음은 이런 구호로 다 같이 동행한 거였죠. 우리는 포기하지 않는다. 진실을 찾겠다. 그리고 우리는 행동하겠다.
So the theme was that we will never forget. We will continue. We will act. We will not stay put. Became the slogans for the movement.
아까 비디오에도 계속 보셨는데 이 구명조끼는 말하자면 그 배에서 이것을 가지고 움직였으면 살아났을 아이들을 상징하는 거예요.
So during the demonstration, you also saw this on the video. Over 304 life vests were laid, and this kind of indicates if we had those life jackets for those students, if we have reacted, and if they have reacted, they would have been here with us today.
그래서 우리 거기서 던지게 된 질문들이 우리는 과연 괜찮은가? 우리의 미래는 괜찮은가 하는 질문이었어요.
So leading up to the movement, I think the question that was prominent was asking ourselves, are we okay? Are we all right?
그래서 도대체 나라라는 건 우리에게 무엇이냐 이런 질문을 던지게 된 거죠.
So leading to asking ourselves, what does a country, what is this country to me?
이런 질문은 사실은 2008년 경제 위기 때부터 계속 던져졌던 질문이었어요.
And this was a constant question that was thrown and thought since the 2008 financial crisis in Korea.
사실 2008년 전에도 아까 그런 통계가 계속 생기면서 던져진 질문이죠.
And it actually goes back before 2008 because as you saw in the graph before, the increase in inequality, that's when people started to question.
정치권이 아무런 일을 안 한 건 아니고요. 그 애들을 구하지 않았던 박근혜 정부, 탄핵당한 박근혜 정부도 경제 민주화를 약속하기도 하고 웰페어 스테이트를 약속하기도 하고 뭔가를 다 약속했어요. 하나도 안 지켰죠.
So before, one of the campaign promises of Park Geun-hye's party was, they will democratize economy, they will, kind of shorten the close the gap between of inequality, but none of those campaign promises were kept.
근데 실제로 국민들에게 돌아온 건 이런 게 아니었고 반정부 세력에 대한 탄압, 특히 세월호 가족들에 대한 탄압 이런 거죠.
And they also before promised the welfare state, but that didn't happen. Rather after the Seoul ferry, anti-government figures or groups, the families of the Seoul ferry disaster were actually criminalized. They were demonized.
그래서 어쨌든 촛불 집회가 일어났는데요.
So all of this was kind of building up, and that kind of launched the candlelight movement in Korea.
지금 홍콩에서도 문제지만 이게 제일 큰 문제였어요. 어떻게 서로 충돌해가지고 집회 장소가 안전해지지 않고 이게 그 폭력의 공포로부터 사람들을 좀 더 자유롭게 할 수 있느냐.
So I think this is something that a lot of people of Hong Kong are considering and worrying about. But even leading up to the candlelight movement, I think this was the main concern. How do we create? Because also in the history of Korean movement, it was very violent. There was a lot of clashes with the police. How do we? One of their main goals was how do we create a space where it's safe, where it'll be for the people, families will be, they'll feel safe to come out and actually participate in this movement.
사실 이런 클래시를 명분으로 경찰은 늘 집회를 금지하죠. 홍콩에도 지금 그런 일이 생기고.
Right, and usually the police or the state oppresses assemblies or protests because and their argument is always the fear of violence from it.
그래서 이거 홍콩에 똑같이 적용될 수 있는 건 아니지만 저희는 계속해서 참여자한테도 평화롭게 행동하자고 촉구했고 또 사실은 조금 어떤 바이올런트더라도 그걸 명분으로 그걸 이유로 그러니까 집회 주최 측이 의도하지 않은 폭력 사태 이후로 경찰이 집회를 막는 것은 불법이다라고 계속해서 법률적인 문제제기를 한 거죠.
So, I mean, I don't know if this will directly relate to the Hong Kong case, but, leading up to the Korea candlelight movement, or during the candlelight movement, the organizers or the emergency action, citizen action groups, they continuously emphasized peaceful assembly, told the protesters that not to provoke, that we need to maintain peace, and then also any type of police action that blocks or instigates violence, they also kind of recognize that that is unlawful as well.
그래서 어떻게든 집회를 좀 평화롭게 관리한 다음부터는 이게 축제가 된 거죠.
So once we were able to establish this type of sense, these demonstrations became a festival rather than a protest.
축제가 되는 것의 장점이 뭐냐면 우리는 즐기고 저쪽은 화가 난다는 거예요.
And the good thing about our protest becoming a festival is, we come out in masses to enjoy this festival, this kind of coming together in unison to, state our mind, and it only angers the other side.
그리고 저쪽을 비웃어 줄 수 있다는 거, 마음도 그 비웃는 거죠. 우리는 즐기면서.
So, it kind of, okay, this is not a very, it pisses off the other side, right? When you're there, you're enjoying, you're laughing, and then you're actually getting your message across, but then they're not able to, because they want to promote violence and.
그게 늘 쉬웠던 건 아니에요. 1년 전까지만 해도 이런 일이 있었어요. 여기서 사람도 죽었습니다.
So it took a while to get to that point, right? Because even the year before the candlelight movement, the situation of protests in Korea was like this. Water cannons used by the state, the police, and because of that, we had one of the protesters die of injuries from the water cannon.
사실 오히려 이런 거보다도 한국에서 이런 게 훨씬 더 빈번했어요.
And then also actually. Compared to peaceful protests on the bottom, like we were more prone in Korea to seeing that, in all of our protests.
사실 이런 상황을 1년 동안 이렇게 만드는 것에 되게 많은 고민들하고 많은 논쟁이 있었고 갈등이 있었고 우리 내부에도 갈등이 있었고.
So within the emergency coalition groups, there were within the year's time from moving from that type of demonstration to a peaceful one took a lot of negotiation, a lot of discussion, debate, and compromise, and just really working together, even within the coalition.
우리 내부 고민 중에 하나는요. 이 랠리를 조직했던 사람을 비난할 것인가 말 것인가 했어요. 우리가 비판할 것인가 말 것인가.
So one of the biggest debates or concerns that we had was, even among the coalition, was whether are we going to criticize the leader or organization that led that violent rally. That was the debate. Are we going to criticize them for that or not?
근데 우리 그런 비난하지 않기로 비판하지 않았습니다. 이 집회 이렇게 폭력적으로 된 것은 경찰 책임이다라고 공통의 입장을 취한 거죠.
So the result was they decided not to criticize the leader or the organizers of that protest, rather because they determined that the provocation was done by the police.
대신 같은 메시지를 계속 반복했습니다. 경찰이 평화롭게 대응하면 우리는 집회를 평화롭게 할 능력이 있고 준비가 돼 있다는 메시지를 반복적으로 전했어요.
So
표현했어요.
So we consistently, constantly, the message that we said repeatedly was, as long as the police was ready and will allow for a peaceful protest, we as protesters will maintain that peace and we will carry out our protest peacefully.
그런 메시지가 경찰을 움직인 건 사실 아니었는데 우리 자신을 그렇게 만든 효과가 있었어요.
So this this repeated, telling us this or saying this message repeatedly, it not only it didn't really move the police officers, but it really moved us or made us to act in that way.
그리고 우리가 조금 정리되니까 경찰이 폭력을 함부로 휘두르기 어려운 환경이 됐죠.
So because we became very conscious of that, and we were more self-aware of the importance of maintaining a peaceful assembly, it created an environment where it was very difficult for the police to act hastily and kind of use violence or use provocation.
그리고 집회 참여하지 않는 사람들도 우리 편이 되게 만들고 그랬었어요.
So even people, which led to the result of people who usually don't participate in types of protests like this, actually came out and participated also.
그리고 사실 지방 정부가 혹은 어쨌든 제도권에서 도와주는 게 있다는 건 굉장히 중요한데 이것은 이거는 구급 차량이 어디 있는가를 알려주는 홍보물이고 이건 화장실이 어디 있는가를 알려주는 홍보물인데 이거를 서울시에서 만들어준 거죠. 시민들에게 나눠줬어요. 서울시가 공식적으로.
So also another part of creating an environment for everyone to come out. So they worked with the Seoul city government and they created this type of information maps. The one on the left, it indicated all the areas where ambulances and medical staff were deployed, where if in any case anyone get hurt, you know exactly where to go, where medical staff is on standby. And on the right was all the locations where there's restrooms, toilets.
예를 들어서 시 정부한테 이런 주장을 할 수 있어요. 경찰만 보내지 말고. 또 군대도 보낸다고 군대만 보내지 말고 이런 구급차도 좀 보내주고 우리가 집회를 할 수 있도록 화장실도 좀 보내주면 우리가 훨씬 더 평화롭게 할 수 있다. 너는 왜 그런 건 안 하냐? 이렇게 물어볼 수 있는 거죠.
So they asked the city and the central government or anyone in turn. They said, why don't you also not only just send your police officers and military to kind of watch or keep watch of the protest, also provide areas and support of medical staff, ambulances, restrooms, so that you could support us in carrying out a peaceful protest.
시간이 없어가지고 다른 거는 근데 하여간 한국에서 이런 집회가 많은 거는 꼭 시민들이 이 집회를 좋아해서가 아니라 정치권이 문제를 해결하지 못했기 때문이죠.
So the reasons why there's so many protests in Korea is not really because people like to gather and protest an issue. It's really because there's a frustration in the government or the legislator not being able to carry out the demands or the requests of the people.
말하자면 한국 민주주의가 훌륭해서가 아니라 한국 민주주의 너무 엉망이어서 이런 집회가 많아서 그렇죠.
So it's not that the democracy of Korea is great that we have so many of these protests. It's because the Korean democracy is not in great shape. That's why we have so many of these protests.
그리고 왜 평화 집회를 하게 됐냐면은 집회하다가 너무 많이 실패했기 때문이에요. 성공한 적이 별로 없기 때문에 그렇죠. 이렇게 많이 모였어도 늘 실패했기 때문에 평화 집회를 하지 않으면 안 된다는 게 굉장히 피부 깊숙이 각인되는 거죠.
So the reason coming up to the peaceful protests of the candlelight, that was only possible because of the many years and many protests that we have failed that resulted in violence, and kind of learning from that trial and error. And all the kind of feeling to the bone of that failure of that protest that turned violent was really what made us realize that in order for us to succeed, we have to have peaceful protests.
사실 최근에 밝혀진 건데 그 촛불 집회하는 동안도 한국군은 만약에 대통령이 진짜 위험해지면 군대를 투입하겠다는 계획을 2번이나 대통령이 보고 있었어요.
So this was just released recently, but the information that we got was that during the candlelight protests, we found out that the military was actually on standby and had plans at least 2 times throughout the whole candlelight demonstration that in any case the president was her life was threatened, that they were ready to be dispatched and will come out to.
그때 다시 그쪽의 계획은 뭐냐면 헌법재판관들을 설득해서 그 탄핵을 무효로 만들고 그래도 데모하는 사람들은 군대로 동원해가지고 다 싹 쓸어버리겠다는 계획이었어요.
So the plan was, they will persuade the Supreme Court justices to, determine that the impeachment was invalid, and then for whoever kind of stayed on to continue that demonstration, the military will be incorporated, will be released to take care of that. That was the plan.
뭐 이런 집회들이 쭉 있었고요. 이건 2013년인데 국정원이 역시 정보기구가 선거에 개입해가지고 선거 결과를 조작했다는 것에 항의하는 집회예요.
So he's kind of going through the pictures of the various protests that Korea had, and this one was in 2013, and it was a protest against Korea found out that the National Intelligence Agency manipulated the elections.
그 한국에서 이런 거를 어쨌든 분단 때문에 그렇고요. 그리고 한국에서는 커뮤니스트를 누구 죽여도 좋다라는 식으로 굉장히 반공정서가 강한 정치 지형이 있죠.
So kind of giving the political background of Korea is that after the Korean peninsula was divided, the ideology became very politicized, kind of taking form in different political parties and ideologies, and then that's why there's in a lot of these protests you can see that how divided the country is we have a lot of extreme conservatives saying communists deserve death, and easily a lot of progressives are labeled as communists, and even still today.
아까 얘기해드렸잖아요. 인구의 3분의 1이 참여했다고 그랬는데 그때도 far right 그룹은 거기 모인 사람 다 공산주의자들이라고 비판했고요. 그 다음에 왜 군대가 가만히 있느냐, 이 사람들 다 죽여라라고는 데모가 있었고 실제로 군대는 그걸 준비하고 있었다는 거예요.
So he mentioned earlier that a third of the country at one point came out to participate in the protests, right? And even among that, when that was happening, there was a small group of very far-right conservative protesters who were kind of doing a counter-protest to the candlelight movement, saying, "Oh, all of them, they're communists. They should be killed. What is the military doing? They should declare a state of emergency, and they should be all killed." And what was surprising was that the government was actually, or the military was actually preparing to do that, or take some kind of action.
다시 한번 촛불, 그래서 우리는 누구였고 우리가 한 것은, 우리가 왜 나왔느냐는 거는, 우리가 너무 어디서 보호받지 못했기 때문이고, 그래서 우리의 미래가 매우 위태롭기 때문에 우리가 일종의 셀프 레스큐를 할 수밖에 없었고, 그래서 평화적으로 저항할 수밖에 없었다는 거죠.
So I think the reason why the candlelight movement was a huge success and why so many people came out was because it was a self-realization that we could not trust the government to do what we wanted them to do, and it was more of a self-rescue mission of vulnerable groups and people, and that's what really compelled everyone to come out because they felt that it was now time for us to, take government ourselves and make things right.
그리고 사실 평화적으로 할 수밖에 없었던 것은 그거 아니면 이길 방법이 없었기 때문이에요. 다른 방법으로 반드시 질 거라고 생각했기 때문에.
And at that time, and we knew that in order for us to win that battle was we had to do it peacefully. They knew the instant that it became violent, they would lose this battle. So that's the reason why.
왜냐하면 저쪽은 더 훨씬 강한 물리를 가지고 우리를 진압할 준비를 계속하고 있기 때문에.
And simply the fact that the state has much more arms and the capacity to deal with violence, and we do not. So peaceful assembly was the only route.
근데 어쨌든 촛불 집회는 시민들의 행동은 실패할 수 있습니다. 우산혁명도 실패했다고 느끼시는지 몰라요? 우리도 여러 촛불 집회를 했지만 실패하는 게 성공하는 것보다 더 많았어요.
So I don't know if you think that the umbrella movement is a failure for you, but for us in Korea, we had so many movements that we considered that was a failure.
근데 제가 느끼는 것은 그렇게 실패해도 경험은 시민들에게 남아있다는 겁니다.
But then, we don't, in the end, we didn't really see that as a failure because every experience, every demonstration, we realized that the people remembered that protest and the issues that we brought forward.
우산혁명을 경험한 세대가 있을 거고 200만 명, 인구의 3분의 1이 거리에 나와서 함께 손을 잡았던 것을 경험한 사람들은 절대로 바뀔 수 없습니다.
So, the umbrella movement, those people, all those people that came out at that time that, fought with you, they have, I'm sure they probably make up a generation now, and they will remember and they will never forget why they came out and, their experience of participating.
2008년에 저희도 되게 참혹하게 망했어요.
So,
2008년 촛불 집회 때.
So this is the 2008 protest kind of against the import of U.S. beef, and this was an epic failure for us.
근데 2016년에 느낀 거는 그때 경험한 사람들은 2019년에 결국 거리에 나왔다.
So this was one of the bigger protests as well in the history of Korea, and although this was a failure, but what we realized in 2016, all those people who participated in that protest made up a generation, and all those people who remembered participating in that, they came out in 2016.
네, 들어주셔서 감사합니다.
Oh, I will end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. When you talked about people at the protest saying they were asking what is the country doing for me and what is the country for the people, it really resonated me because during this movement, Hong Kong people also show a lot of collective identity and also sense of belonging, and I think that is part of the reason why people are still protesting and maintaining the morale and also momentum. And I guess several key lessons that I learned or questions that I would like to ask later would be because many people who participate in the candlelight revolution, they came out because of various reasons. It wasn't just about President Park misbehavior. So when you have people who are protesting for different reasons, how do you build a consensus so they have an uniform and unifying visions to continue the protest? And I guess the second question, which is something you have already covered, but I would like to hear more about how the NGOs and how the protester network are collaborating with each other to sustain the momentum of the movement. And lastly, what happened after you win the movement, right? So it's really important for the protesters to consolidate the result and the victory they gained from the movement. So 2 years, well, so it's been almost 3 years after the initial protest, and now there's a change of administration. How do civil societies and how do protesters consolidate their victory so there is no more part again? So I just want to, I am feeling that the environment at the room is a little bit low. We have some water out there. You can also maybe stand up if you're feeling very tired. If you need water, you can just raise your hand and I will give it to you. So without further ado, we will invite Ichal, who will going to introduce Indonesian movement to us. Okay.
I use this little hubs microphones. Hi again, everyone. Thank you to staying with us again. I think it's quite long journey since 7:30. And then I would like to introduce myself. My name is Ichal Supriadi, originally Indonesia, but now stay in Bangkok. It's quite a bit here and there. I'm working as a Secretary General of Asia Democracy Network, who is the co-host of these events. I would like to express my admiration first. It's my privilege. I'm here in the middle of the future leaders of democracy, which is you. And in the middle of the legend of the Hong Kong protesters. You are the stars. You are in every news. I read the newspapers, TV, radio in Indonesia. It's all news about you. I went to Bangkok, where I stay. Also news about you. And everywhere I go, all are about you. So may I invite a big round of applause for all of us here. So I would like to start my sharing by quotes the slogans of the candlelight movement. Is there anybody still remember the slogans? No, right? The slogan was, "The darkness cannot defeat the light." Am I correct? Right, see? I'm a good watcher. It is happening only 2 years ago, or last year. But then again, let me quote a similar movement happened in Manila, 1986, by using the similar terminology. Better to light the candle rather than curse the darkness. Anybody still remember that? Well, I'm still in the elementary school during back then, 1986. It was the slogan of the National Action Movement, or NAMPREL. It was like a worldwide, the national-wide election monitoring groups in the Philippines. The two darkness and the two candle and the two lights representing two different era. One happened back in 1986 and the one just happening maybe years ago. Just reflects, since the post-Cold War, there are always movement in different countries across Asia in different times. Let me quote some. 1974 in Indonesia, especially in Jakarta, there is a Malari movement led by the students to refuse or to reject the Japan's automotive dominations. And then 1980, everybody must remember Gwangju uprising is like a 4 hours travel from South Korea, from Seoul. And then 1986, there's a EDSA, people uprising, or people power in the Philippines. And then they have Java Andalan 1990 in Nepal. It is the embryo of the people movement, multi-party movement that finally able to, to erase or to dismiss the last Hindu kingdom in the world, which is in Nepal. 1991, we remember Tiananmen, and then until 1998, in Indonesia, and then so on, so on. The latest one, we must remember, of course, your movement, umbrella movements, and then in Taipei, candlelight movements, and then until your current movement. You're making history here. What I try to highlight, there's a two different style of protest, and there is two different response of the military or the government during the times. We witnessed during 1970 to 90, the 2000, there's always brutal crackdowns. But then again, in the recent years, with the rising of the social media, technology, they have less brutals of the response to the student protests. Well, I'm representing the 1998 Indonesian student uprisings. At times, I believe even before 90, so many movements, but they're successful in pressure to crack down by the governments until the moment is just right. We have crisis, economic crisis. Do you remember, right? 1998 crisis, and then our economic was collapsed. And then few report of the 1997 electoral has been rigged, and there's opportunity for people to raise. So it's not only once, but many of students come to the streets, and also many of the multi-party or multi-groups that come to the streets. I was in the university school at times. Even difficult to organize a movement within inside the campus because you have to obtain, permit from the dean, from the faculty, or from the university authorities. This is not only a problem of my university, but I believe the problem of university across Indonesia. But we overcome. Our friend overcomes the challenges. We managed to come to the streets. Well, that's I'm not just followers. I'm not part of the leaders like few of you here that managing the leaders, or not like Mr. Lee Tai-ho. He's not in the crowd because he's managing from behind the scene, but I'm opposite side. I was in the crowd because my senior, the one who managing behind the scenes. If you notice, Yvonne from the Philippines, me and the Tai-ho coming from different generations. So I think this is the objective why we bring different generations to come here to learn more different perspective. But then again, despite a lot of movements in Asia since 1970 to now, we experience loss. It's not every movement successful. Some are successful, some are winning or temporarily, but then again, we lost many casualties. Many of my senior friends are still disappears. At least there's a 13 my senior still disappears up to now. We don't know whether they're still alive or they are died, and if they died, there is no probes of the government trying to discover the case where they've been assassinated, and then where is the graveyards, or there is no certain of recognition from the states regarding of the victim of disappearance. I believe there's many of victims of uprising in many countries. I think we share sympathy and condolence, and of course, we share sorrow for all of them. Now, back to your movements. Why you become inspiration for many of us? I come here especially to share my experience, but I'm interested to learn more about your movement. You just simply, let me put it in this way, you are representing a new trend of protest style. In the past, people go to the street, but for the last 5 years, the struggle moved from the street to the social media. But today, you prove it. You struggle on the street, and you smartly use your social media to reaching people abroad, to telling people about your movements, about what you think, you're right, and you're defending your democracy, and you're defending your rights. I believe you cannot representing anymore about the youth, but the youth already bring the gray hair. The youth already inspired many of multi-sectors in Hong Kong to come together. For what? To defending your rights. Not only for you, but for the next generation of Hong Kong peoples. I think this is something that to be applauded. But then again, the question is, as an Asian Democracy Network, what next? Right? Between all the histories, the glory of the candlelight, the glory of Umbrella Revolution, and the Taiwan protesters, and the past dark history of the movement in Asia, what we can bring together, I think this is something that we need to formulate here. I need to share with you in the current context of the movements. You just starting the game. In the current regression of democracy in Asia because of hate speech, intolerance, the growing non-democratic country influence. I'm not naming the country, but I believe you know is that there is nobody immune about the influence of the social media, that increasing hate speech, intolerance, extremisms, and then the trends of the authoritarianism governments, because they have a good allies right now. There is times of the ruling countries in Asia is becoming more authoritarian because they don't fear the UN sanctions, they don't fear Western sanctions, because they have very strong and powerful partners right now. Well, you know who are they. So, who are immune? Nobody immune. From the boundary of the Pacific country of Timor-Leste up to the boundary of the East, the Central Asia, all are now sitting and sleeping together with non-democratic countries. And then what we're doing, you just set up the trends. Doesn't matter who are there, doesn't matter what the government policy, as long they respect the democracy principle to keep continue. There's assurance of the freedom of assembly, association, and freedom of expression, as well as the respect of the human right. I think there's something that we have to not compromise. There is something that we need to hold, something that we have to believe. If you have growing economy without the respect of democracy and human rights, I think we lost half of our soul. Indonesia, the same situation. Soon or later, we have to respond of this question. Many countries in Asia, let's say these few years, there's a new hopes coming from Malaysia opposition victory after 60 years of domination of ruling party, but now they have a chance to reform. In Maldives, we have a hopes. But then again, what we lost? We lost Cambodia, we lost Bangladesh. Thailand's continuing coup d'etat all the times. And then, let's say, Myanmar in uncertain situation in terms of human rights and then democracy practices. I think this is coming together. What's next? I don't want to prolong. I know you already been here and listening so much story about us, about the movement. How to make this continue? I guess you have to get ready if suppose your struggle continues or your struggle is prolonged. Maybe this will not end next month, or maybe this not end next year, next 2 years. I think the solid question is how the Hong Kong student or the Hong Kong protester prepare yourself for the long struggle of democracy demands. And we witness fury about the violence. I think this is something we also need to consider by seeing the candlelight revolution that we just saw just now, how they move the protests to becoming festival with music, with dance that can bring in all society until the children to joining the protests. In the long run, I think this will be very, very benefit for your movements. And then how you bring impact to the international or the global arena, because you studied and how you share your experience, how you connect with international peoples to releasing your news, and then at the same time they also learn about your protest, and then we can tailoring each other and how to support and defending democracy together. I like the idea to impose the youth in the front line, but against the youth in the front line will be benefit for the longer form of the struggle. And then, of course, in the worst case, you also need to consider the worst case scenario if suppose there is a backlash from whatever you're doing right now. I have to stop from that point, and then I rather to have discussion with you guys. And then again, thank you and my respect for all of you, and then to fight for democracy in Hong Kong. Thank you so much.
So may I ask the guests to be seated, because we are going to open the floor for a Q&A section. And I'm taking my liberty as the host to ask you the first question, which is, so because you work on regional, you're a regional network, you work on a regional level. And I guess Hong Kong people are guessing here would be very interested to know what a winner internationally or regionally that we can engage to advocate human rights in Hong Kong. And most of, in the past, most of our attention pays to Western countries. But what would be the opportunities from your observation to advocate human rights to Asians or East Asian government? So along with my questions that was raised before, I will first open the floor without further ado. So let's take 2 questions for one round, and then we will go back, and then the guests can answer the questions. So any questions? Okay. Okay.
I've got a couple. Thank you for the sharings, and really much appreciated. I've got a couple of questions for Mr. Lee from Korea. Right. First, I was really amazed that for the participants in the rallies, you have got like 1/3 of the participants from the centralists and the conservatives. So I want to know, first of all, what do you mean by conservatives? For that composition. That's one thing. And then second thing is, why did you manage to get that many, that amount of conservative and centralists to be, to participate in the movement or in the rallies? Was that simply because of the wider social and political context, or was there any strategy being used in the process? And then the third question, also a short one, and I'm also very interested in what happened in the Situation Room, it's, the kind of strategies or concerns, in that process. Thank you.
Questions? 睇緊直播嘅網民都可以，我睇緊立場個直播㗎啦，係。
Hello, I have a question for Ms. Ivanka. As you mentioned, when you first participate in some movement, you were still only in college. So back then, did you have any problems or intense relationship with your family? Are they supporting you, or so as your peers? Are they facing the problem? Because I believe now we are having the movement in Hong Kong, and I believe a lot of the youth are also facing problem and getting the relationship with their family are getting more intense because of having different stance or points of view about the political ideas. So maybe could you share some more for us? Thank you.
First.
그 컨서버티브스는 뭐 어떤 기준이냐가 아니라 스스로 자기 그 오피니언 폴을 했는데 자기가 보수적이라고 표시한 사람.
So the conservatives, that were identified, it was simply those who identified as conservatives in polls.
근데 이제 한국에서 주로 보수적이라고 하는 사람들의 특징은 한국과 미국과의 동맹이 되게 중요하다고 생각하는 사람들. 그 다음에 노조가 너무 강해진 것은 경제 발전에 좋지 않다라고 생각하는 사람들. 보통 이런 사람들 컨서버티브스.
So, and when we say conservatives, it's usually those who identify that, in Korea, that alliance between the U.S. and Korea is very important, and those who think that, having strong trade unions is not good for economic progress or development.
그런데 촛불 집회에 왜 그런 보수적인 사람들도 나왔느냐 하는 질문이 가능한데요. 그것은 아까 그 경제적인 지표나 여러 가지 그 사람들의 생각으로 그 요구가 발전하는 것을 봤을 때 이렇게 무능하고 이런 정부가 계속되면 실제로 보수의 헤즈모니 자체에 큰 위기가 올 거라고 생각했기 때문에 보수 정치인들도 그리고 보수적인 언론들도 임피치먼트 되는 거죠.
So, then you could naturally ask then, why did the conservatives also participate in this candlelight movement? And that could be answered in, if you were looking, if we look back at that graph that indicated the economic, inequality and the difficulties on the economy that they were facing. Even the conservatives, they felt that at that time, with a leader like Park, that was not able to deliver any of her promises, that this would totally bring down the conservative hegemony. So that's why they decided that we cannot keep her in power, and that's why they participated in the impeachment protests.
그다음에 시츄에이션 룸에서 무슨 일이 있었느냐인데 주로 논쟁이 있었죠.
And you asked what was happening behind the scenes in the situation room, and mostly we were debating, arguing, discussing.
사실은 우리는 아까도 얘기했지만 공간을 제공했을 뿐이고 시민들이 자발적으로 모인 거였어요. 우리가 할 일이 많지는 않았습니다.
So, as I mentioned earlier, there was not much, there was not much coordination that we did as a coalition or the Situation Room. We just simply provided the platform and space for the people. It was the citizens who themselves came out and organized themselves and made sure to participate in the protest. We just provided the space.
근데 어쨌든 우리는 안전한 공간을 보장해야 되니까 굉장히 힘든 일이었긴 했어요.
But our main goal in the Situation Room as a coalition was to provide a safe space, to make sure that the protesters were safe, and that was a very difficult task.
그다음에 모인 사람들이 원하지 않는 주장을 하지 않게 만드는 것도 되게 중요해요. 있는 사람이 원하지 않는 주장이 나오지 않게.
And also, because it was a massive gathering of very different people, it was also a difficult task to make sure that we did not make any arguments or demands as a protest that no one did not want.
하지만 많은 사람들이 모였기 때문에 집회의 다양성을 보게 되고 다양한 목소리가 나오게 해야 되는 거죠. 그렇지 않으면 재미가 없어. 이건 내 공간, 내가 주인공이 아니다. 나갈 테니까. 하지만 다양한 목소리가 나오되 다른 모인 사람들을 상처 주지 않게 해야 됩니다. 그게
So I think it was very difficult managing because you have a gathering of so many different types of people with different perspectives and objectives. How do we maintain that we respect and embrace the different perspectives of this participants of the protest, at the same time that we do not have them insult each other or disrespect each other's views. How do we maintain that peace was also a difficult task.
그래서 논쟁은 주로 키노트 스피치는 어떤 내용을 담아야 되느냐, 구호는 어떻게 해야 되느냐, 그리고 어떤 연설할 사람들을 선택하거나 추천할 것이냐.
So a lot that was debated in the Situation Room was, so what key message are we going to have the keynote speaker deliver? What kind of slogans are we going to cheer during the protest? At the same time, and making sure that it embraces all the different perspectives.
예를 들면서 근데 키노트 스피커가 박근혜 대통령을 비판했는데 여성이어서 비판한다는 인상을 줬어요. 여성 헤이트 스피치가 아니라 여성에 대한 헤이트 스피치였다라는 비판이 왔어요. 이 문제에 대해서 사과할 것인가 말 것인가도 먼저.
So also another difficult task was who are we going to bring in to deliver keynote speech? And there was a situation where we had someone deliver a keynote speech about criticizing President Park, but then it was understood or portrayed as the keynote speaker criticizing her because she was a woman. Like a very misogynistic speech. So, then at that time, if this type of criticism comes out, then we had to also discuss on a strategy of how we're going to respond to this. So stuff like that continuously.
So, I really like your question, because as LGBTs and as feminists, like the personal narratives are intimately linked with the political narratives. And I always feel happy sharing my personal and political narrative. And so when I first joined the protest during my college years, it was a time when I already had a background on feminism. So I would say that I was ripe for political awakening at that time because I was taking up gender studies. So there was already a lot of discussion about how as a woman I was facing injustice, and how as a queer person that injustice is even more amplified. And with that kind of theoretical and academic background, when I was invited to that first protest, I immediately said yes, because I really wanted to have a practice where I can apply whatever learnings I've had in academic discussions. And that first protest was actually my coming out time as well. After that protest that I attended, I had this shirt that said, it's a statement shirt that played on the accusation of the Commission on Elections against LGBTQ people back then that we were immoral. So we played on that word, and the shirt said, "I'm moral." And it had the logo of the LGBT party at the back of the shirt. And that shirt is something that I brought home that shirt, and my dad actually found that shirt. And like prior to that, I never imagined that I would like voluntarily come out to my parents, because my parents are very strict Catholics, and like I never imagined like having enough courage to actually bring up the issue to my parents. But when my dad found that, and he was like, "What's this?" And I was confronted with a dilemma that, I can deny that this is mine. Like I can always make up a reason why I have that shirt, but at the same time, it was also like I felt that it was an opportunity for me to like actually own up to my identity, because I didn't feel that I would have the guts to volunteer that information. So I did come out to my dad on that day, and I was very happy that that actually happened, because right now, like my parents have really sort of evolved in terms of their understanding and support for what I'm doing. Well, they still hold on very dearly to their Catholic faith, and but I think that we've really like grown from a place where like these things were not being talked about in our household, to now like I can actually bring my partner to our house, and so
Well, I just want to comment about the advocacy in the international arena. I guess there's several formal and informal. Of course, formal, everybody knows about UN channels, and then there's a regional channels, Commonwealth, through EU, and then through other channels, or even bilateral channels to the like-minded governments. Although there's kind of like speculation of there will be a bigger power to block the option or the resolution if something goes wrong with the future protests here. But I remember one of my friends from Human Rights Watch, I don't name his names, but then again he say, for whatever bad things happen for your country, keep make noise. Keep make noise. You can make a noise in UN, in the European channels or any channels, and then you make the bad governments pay expensive for whatever the cost that they wanted to take. And then, but the most important is advocacy among yourself. If you compare with the previous movement back to the 1990s, everybody pay the cost. It is very common people end up in the jails, under torture. But then again, this is something that a little bit, reduce. The people easily decided to escape, to exile for a while, rather than they have to facing and then keep struggle from inside the country. So advocating among ourselves, among different groups inside the country, also very important for us, because for me, I can believe if you let 10 people, 5 people, 10 people, even 20 people get arrested, then you lost. But if you make 500 or even 1,000 people get arrested, then you will win. Well, at least that's the theory that I believe. Well, sometimes not apply. Could apply in some good conditions, but somehow maybe it's not apply in different conditions.
Thank you. We are actually close to the official closing time, but we can take 10 more minutes if there is additional questions. So we'd like to see if there are questions from the floor.
Hi, thank you for your very interesting sharing. My question is for all of the panelists, but mostly, first of all, perhaps Mr. Lee can answer. I was very fascinated by what you said, how South Korea moved from a more violent form of protest into a peaceful kind of protest. Now, how were you able to build that consensus among civil society that violent protest was not the way to go? And when your peaceful protests went on for such a relatively long period of time, how did you manage any factions which started to think, oh, we need to escalate in order to get some concrete results? And this is kind of reflecting on the situation in Hong Kong right now. So, for the other panelists, how do you handle it when you have factions in your movement which might want to escalate into actions that the majority, may have reservations about? How do you handle that kind of development? And secondly, I guess all of you spoke about how movements might go on for weeks, months, even years nowadays. How do you maintain the momentum and unity with the people? And also, how do you engage? What tips do you have for engaging, like the masses out there who are still apathetic towards all these issues, and or who feel powerless about social movements in general? Thank you.
Any more questions? Last chance.
Yeah, there. Thank you for the sharing. And I would like to ask your experience about your country and the government employing paramilitary or gangster to do the dirty jobs. Because in Hong Kong, the trend just started in these few years, following the footstep of China, employing these kind of people to do the dirty jobs. And I think in other Asian countries, you have more experience of this in the past. So any tips how you check the human rights balance in this sense? Thank you so much.
Those three questions very heavy, You want to answer first? Oh, you just briefing. Okay, do you want to answer any of those three questions? After me. Well, especially the first question goes to you. I would like to respond the question about faction and maintain longer struggle, as well as the using of gangster. Well, faction is happen in any movement. The history records. Well, I can tell a little bit story about Indonesia. The student was one before, and then there's a quarrel between using diplomacy, using state fight, or using pressure, and then so many things coming together until finally they decided to split. It's becoming a little bit radical, a little bit negotiable movements, and then there's so many factions. I can't remember, but there's MJ, RMNB, Forbes, so many movements. And even the labor, they also have splits, the peasants. But then again, there is one thing that unites us. Do not matter about different tactics, but just matter about similarities, our goal. Our goal, what we try to reach. And then it's good if we can distinguish each other. So people might know who are they and what is their tactic, in order to make this thing include the government level. Sometimes the ruling might label everything are the same, but sometimes it's good and there's advantage for you to recognize, to even to declare if there's a several faction, everything's taking different strategy and tactic, from compromise, negotiable, until the radical and violence, in order for them to recognize. So at the moment, everybody, even me, I just know one Hong Kong protesters. When you make violence, I cannot easily recognize who are they, although they're coming from different groups. But for me, that's all Hong Kong protesters. So I think it's good to make this thing on that. To prolong or to maintain the struggles, I think in different countries apply differently. But I witnessed protests in Thailand in 2014. It's almost 3 to 7 months ago. they have a wave of the people, shift changing every 2 days, every week, continuously modify the issues, changing the places, bringing the new leaders. I mean, so many tactics, but I don't know what is suitable for the Hong Kong citizens' interests. But there's always a way to modify, to refine, to renew it from the strategy, from the topic, from the movement, etc., etc. I even witnessed a movement that lasting for, let's say, 15 years. Let's say the movement of the Timor-Leste, self-determination, and I'm sorry to mention this, many of my friends who are still living in Dharamsala, they even doesn't know the name of their country. I'm not mentioning the country, but they just can imagine some of the religious leader was ousted from the countries and now even cannot return, and even they just can imagine how the country looks like. They just listen, reading from the book, from the radio. They never touch the lands beyond the Himalaya mountains. And then gangster. This morning I had an interview. Gangster, militia, is the dirty old tactic that always been used to do the ruling dirty games. In many countries, they may apply different things in order to overcome the gangster militia that might be organized by the government, or maybe by military, or maybe by the police. But I guess whoever are there, we need to be more strong than them. There's a few kind of strategy that you can impose, but in the current context, if you are less power, you are powerless than them, I think you have to starting to record, doing investigation, who are they, trace the source of them, making a big noises, highlight who are they, who pay them, and then make a big blow on this, shame the people that pay for them. So I think it's easy to be traced. In the past, I don't know whether it still apply here, when they're using this kind of tactic, when they're using intelligence mechanism, the students, the protesters also need to impose contra-intelligence and then contra-investigation. There's a way on that to learn. I think so many organizations ready to prepare, willing to give training on them. But then again, it's nothing independence initiative in terms of the violence. And I believe in the case of the uniformed peoples that attacked the protesters a few days ago, I think they're well organized, well from my observations, and they're well equipped and they will command. Now it's you, everybody now waiting to review who are they. And I think to making international outcry regarding of this is also fine. But this is not new phenomena. This is all dirty tactics. And I don't know, I cannot suggest you how to deal with them, but I guess you should maintain your own strategy how to overcome them. Thank you.
내부의 차이를 어떻게 극복하느냐 질문 주셨는데 일단 결론은 이철 씨가 말한 거랑 비슷해요.
So how do you kind of deal with the factions within the movements? It's kind of similar to what Ichal mentioned.
근데 조금 더 충격적인 얘기를 하면 한국에서는 차이를 강조하다가 너무 많이 죽었기 때문에 그러고 있어요. 그걸 최소화하는 방안을 찾고 있어요. 의견 차이가 사람을 너무 많이 죽게 했기 때문에.
So what was more shocking is, the differences in approaches was what caused a lot of deaths inside these movements. That's why we had to shorten the factions or.
이거 슬픈 얘기인데 한국에서는 냉전 이후에 남한과 북한이 서로 입장 차이 때문에 전쟁을 했어요.
So this is a sad story, but because South Korea and North Korea after the division, they had a difference in ideology and thought. That is what led it into war.
거기서 300만 명이 죽었습니다. 300만 명. 3 million.
So as a result, 3 million people died in that war.
그 다음에 남한에서는 그런 빨갱이라고 커뮤니스트라고는 죽어도 되게 됐어요. 실제로.
So in South Korea, what was instilled, the sentiment was, if you're communist, it's okay to die.
그래가지고 실제로 많은 사람들이 고문받고 죽었습니다.
So because of this simple way of thought, many people were persecuted to be communist, were tortured, and were killed.
사실은 그 촛불 집회하기 3년 전에 한국에서 정당 하나가 강제로 해산됐어요.
So 3 years before the Candlelight Revolution, we had what happened in Korea was a political party was dissolved.
그게 프로 노스 코리아 파티라고 해서 강제로 해산됐습니다.
And they were labeled as a pro-North Korean party. That's why they were dissolved.
그래서 그렇지만 또 그럴수록 운동 내에서는 뭐 그런 상황에 다 이렇게 겁내지 않잖아요. 그러니까 그럼에도 불구하고 그런 신념을 유지하는 사람들의 입장은 되게 강하죠.
So despite a lot of what happens, how people with a different way of thinking are persecuted, there are those who continue to persevere, and usually those are very have a stronger opinion.
예를 들어서 70년 동안 북한을 좋아했다는 이유로 계속 탄압받아 온 사람이 그 신념을 버릴까요?
So, for example, if if a person who over 70 years had a very strong sentiment towards North Korea and they were oppressed by it, will they easily let go if they were persecuted for over 70 years for having that type of way of thought?
그러니까 한국 사회 운동에는 북한이 세계에서 가장 독재 국가고 가장 못 사는 나라인데도 북한과 반드시 같이 가야 된다는 신념을 가진 사람이 아직도 상당한 퍼센테이지가 있어요. 그리고 그것 때문에 한국 사회운동은 늘 빨갱이라는 소리를 듣고 있어요.
So, North Korea is one of the most authoritarian state and that is very poverty-ridden. But a lot of the thought and majority of civil society has this idea that they need to go, so a minority of people have this idea that they have to go with North Korea to continue the movement.
한국 사회운동은 그 사람들이랑 같이 코올리션을 하고 있어요. 이 촛불 집회에도 그 사람들이 같이 참여했어요.
Right, and for those majority have that type of thinking, obviously they're going to be labeled as pro-communist, right? But even if that, but there are also civil society, although that's a very minority group that have that ideology. But we also, as a coalition, need to kind of work with them and go with them in kind of moving forward this movement.
근데 한 가지 다행스러운 것은 이 한국 사회운동에 있는 프로 노스 코리안 그룹이 하도 당했기 때문에 평화적 방식을 선호한다는 거예요.
So the interesting fact is that these pro-North Korean civil society organization, because they have this history of being so oppressed by the society of Korea, that they actually use the peaceful approach. They've gone through the continuous oppression of their activism, that they actually prefer the peaceful route.
결론적으로 한 가지 말씀드리면 한국 사회운동은 국가 폭력에 너무도 많이 당했기 때문에 평화적 방식이 생존의 방식이라는 걸 체득하고 있다는 거예요.
So as a result, because the civil society movements in Korea, they were repressed by the state for a long time. So we have a history of repeated state violence against movements in civil society that it has become to the bone a fact that we must, in order for us to succeed, we must go towards a peaceful approach.
그리고 설사 어떤 폭력이 발생했을 때도 그 사람들을 어떻게 보호해야 되는지에 대해서 굉장히 많은 관심을 가져요.
So that's why even at the time when violence does happen, biggest concern or biggest goal that we have is how do we respond to that and then maintain that it's continued peacefully.
그래서 운동의 코어 그룹이 되게 중요하긴 한데 행동을 같이 하는 코어 그룹이 중요한데 어떤 경우에는 버퍼를 잘 만드는 게 되게 중요할 수 있어요. 버퍼. 그리고 그 강렬한 색깔을 가진 사람보다 회색 그룹이 더 중요할 때도 있죠.
So I mean, in action or in activism, of course, having a core group is very important. But actually, many times having kind of that gray area as a buffer or bumper is also very important.
그다음에 이제 계기를 어떻게 유지하느냐 되게 힘들어요, 사실.
And on your question on how do you maintain the momentum and interest in these movements it's very difficult.
솔직히 시민들은 계속 거리에 나오지 못해요.
And actually, practically speaking, citizens are not able to come out every week.
그래서 사실은 데모가 세상을 바꾼다고 그러지만 사실은 아주 심각할 때는 시민들은 거리에 안 나와요.
So I mean, we say that protest is what brings change, but to be honest, I mean, unless it's a very important issue that reaches the heart of those citizens, it's difficult to convince them to come out and participate.
그래서 사실 데모를 해가지고 좋은 상황이 열렸는데 좋은 상황이 열려서 조금만 더 하면 될 때 안 나와요.
So and the most difficult thing is when you're building this momentum and where we could see success and we just need a little bit more people to come out and they don't.
사실은 그런 다이내미즘이 있다는 걸 이해하고 설계를 해야 될 것 같아요.
So and I think it's very important to understand that there are those type of dynamics and within these movements and be aware of that and be able to kind of structure or design your movement taking in mind those variables.
그래서 확실히 집중해야 될 때를 되게 분명히 제시하는 게 중요할 것 같아요. 이때는 꼭 나와야 된다라고 하면서 타이밍을 되게 분명히 제시하는 거예요.
So I think it's very important for in sustaining the interest is, when you have a point in your movement where it is so critical to bring out the masses that you are clear on why it's so important for, you could not come out, you don't have to come out anywhere else, but you have to be at this one, is make sure to be able to clearly emphasize that. And I think, he had a slide with all those different posters for each week. And I think that those posters were they indicated on, the main theme of that protest. And I think he's emphasizing that it's very important that you are very clear on what.
근데 한 가지 중요한 건 이거예요. 데모에 시민이 안 나온다고 해서 시민이 관심을 안 갖고 있는 건 아니라고 믿는 것도 중요해요.
And it's very important that you do not get discouraged that just because the citizens are not on the street with you that they're apathetic. You need to believe that they do take interest in your movement. It's just that you may not be physically able to come out.
그걸 못 믿게 되면 조직하는 사람들이 너무 조급해져가지고 일을 망칠 수 있어요.
Right, and that type of thinking, it disempowers you, and it could hinder the organizer's strategy in moving forward with the movement.
So just very quickly, because I know that they're all aching to go home. On the first question on how do you handle different factions who want to escalate into violence, I think that you can take all the precautionary measures, make all the very good arguments against using violence in protests, but there's like there's bound to be like instances where people would react violently. Either on the side of the protesters, it is like an offensive attack or an act of defense. But it's important to always be ready with mitigation mechanisms. Like, be ready for when someone from your side actually responds in a violent way. Like, I think I was talking to someone about this earlier, that maybe like putting on the front lines the elderly people, or like religious leaders, like people who are like the people that these young protesters respect, you know, so that they won't actually, like, they think twice before instigating an act of violence. On maintaining the momentum, like a lot has been said about it. But I think I also agree with Teho that it's really difficult, but that's why when there are opportunities like this, like where a lot of people are joining the mobilizations, it's important to take this opportunity to consolidate people, like build as many organizations as you can, like try to like build coalitions in order to like make something out of those opportunities. And like on employing gangsters to do the dirty job, like I agree with Ichal that this is an age-old tactic by governments who want to deflect accountability for these dirty jobs. In the Philippines, it's a tactic that was employed during the dictatorship. Right now, there's a rise again of anti-communist militias, you know, that are being instigated by the military in order to do these repressive tactics on their behalf. So it's important, I think, I agree that we have to be stronger than them, but also we need to keep holding the government accountable for these acts. Like, even though it's hard to prove that it's a government that commanded these mobs or militias, hold them accountable for investigating these violent attacks. So.
Great. Okay. Right. Hello. Okay. Well, so I think the speakers deserve one last round of applause. And during lunch, we are actually considering going daydreaming tomorrow in Geun-hye. So if you have further questions, or if you just want to say hi, you may see us tomorrow. And I'm persuading the speakers to go for a drink after we close this panel. It's going to be a nearby rooftop bar, so if any one of you are interested, feel free to join us. So again, thank you very much for your participation. 唔該晒基進報導同埋立場新聞嘅直播，咁佢哋都有晒所有嘅 archive 嘅。咁如果你想重溫今日嘅環節嘅話，亦都可以上翻去嗰度睇啦。係 ，OK，thank you everyone。